yeah,
avenue to do that.
keep that to use that example. That's a really good idea.
Okay, team, let's go. We're going live. This is a live stream workshop.
Yeah,
and
keep that to
it's,
use that example.
we ready?
Simon, you'll need your mic as well. Don't forget your mic.
So welcome everyone to this public workshop. This is a piece of work that's been going on under the watch of Simon Bastian for Council's business continuity plan and management system. So I'll hand straight over to Simon, who can take us through the workshop.
Yeah, good afternoon, councillors. As you can see, we've got a special guest in the room today. I was handed this baby from the CEO when I arrived to actually take a lead on the PCP. You may have seen the previous ones, those that have been around before. Reasonably underwhelming. We had a decision around SLT, how do we make this work and how do we actually make it a best practice document? So we've engaged with Phil, who thankfully decided to work with us to develop what I think is a very outstanding piece of work. And so we have today, it does say draft because there'll be some minor amendments, but it's pretty close to final. We'll take any feedback from today as well and actually refine the document if there's any positive stuff that, or even negative stuff that needs to be addressed. And I'll hand you over this to Phil, will take you through, I suppose, the process and also how the document's set out. So over to you, Phil.
Yes.
Thank you. So red's on, cool, thank you. If I stand, I suspect I'm too far away. So can I sit? No disrespect. Yep, cool, but it'll just mean I'm closer to the microphone if that's all right. So thank you, Simon. Then we've got 16 slides here that are endeavouring to give just a very high level overview of how this came about, what this looks like, okay, so that you can get familiar with it, if that makes sense. These are big bits of work, so we could spend okay, yeah, it's gone red now, thank you. So the challenge here was to completely overhaul and update a business continuity plan for council. If we're going to do something, we want to do it right. So we started with, well, what does really good look like? And there are two standards, one international standard and a New Zealand standard that would set the expectations for what best practice would look like. So that's where we started with, and everything that has been done maps very closely to the international standard for security and resilience specific to organisations. So that's where we went. Oh. Okay, I'm not going to just read this line for line. I'll take the stuff as read, but this is more than the tick box exercise. That's, I guess, the point I want to make here. This writes to every level of organisational kind of performance objectives and outcomes, if that makes sense, including even non-tangible things around, you know, attractiveness as an employer. When things go wrong, that, you know, it doesn't turn into mad panic, actually, that it's a rewarding, thrilling, calm place to exist in, if that makes sense, let alone all the other things around, you know, managing exposures, risk, credibility, performance, etc. Those acronyms, or that acronym BCMS, that last word is system, and that's very, very important here. Initially, we're kind of thinking it's a plan, but actually this is an agglomeration of a number of plans that comes into an overall system, if that makes sense. So we are referring to this whole bit of work really as a business continuity management system, of which there are three main pillars. And even then, those pillars have some sort of sub-branches, if that makes sense. So we've got a crisis management plan sitting under the system. We've got an IT disaster recovery plan, and we'll come to the detail of these in the coming slides. And then we've actually got a business continuity plan. So all of those things wrap up into what we're calling the business continuity management system. These things can be so unwieldy that they are quite frankly unusable in my view. So the challenge here was, how do we bring this together in a form that is easily mitigated, understood, so it's ultimately usable, so it's ultimately valuable. Yeah, and that's what we've tried to do. I just want to talk about the scope so that everyone's clear on what the scope sets out to achieve. We have drawn the boundaries around council's direct control. Okay, so specifically out of scope here, things that we can't control or aren't controlling, is the function of, say, some of the Buller Holdings entities, so Westreef or PERC. Okay, we're in direct control of those, and also the interrelationship and crossover with West Coast Civil Defence and Emergency Management. Okay, we're not suddenly assuming their responsibilities. We could have similar crises that affect both, and there's a clear kind of a plug in there, but we're not setting out to reinvent the wheel for a structure and an organisational chart that already exists. Okay, so this is everything else that sits under council's scope of services, if that makes sense.
In reality, for civil defence emergency, BDC would probably be operating its own under the system itself to
Correct.
maintain services
Correct.
while that was happening over there.
Correct. Correct. Okay. So in terms of how this actually would work in a step-through system, the first thing that happens is the organisation has a risk management approach, and I think everyone's familiar with that. We've sat in this room and presented that previously. So that's the very first thing we use for a start, is how do we diagnose those things that might happen and what controls we're going to put in place to stop them happening first and foremost. So that's always our first step and approach. And then when incidents, disruptions do happen, first sort of responsibility is understanding whether they have an actual emergency response element to them, i.e. is there physical threat to people? And then it moves through into essentially, now is this issue presenting at such a scale that it's beyond the normal capacity of a day-to-day operation, therefore it's a crisis, therefore we need to go into a special mode there. And if we get through those steps and we've either attended to them or they don't apply, then it comes back down into business continuity, which is, how do we just restore normal operations as quickly as possible? Okay, so that's sort of just understanding how it relates to all those scenarios, so it's not a big mad jumble. So coming into the first element, crisis management plan, it's built on 5 key components. So how we would notify, escalate, and then actually assess whether this is a crisis or not. Then it's got, steps, procedures, processes for identifying and responding to emergencies, into then the response planning. So what sort of response is necessary and needed based on what we're faced with, into the crisis communications, incredibly important part of managing it. And then any good system, and certainly this being an international standard mapped bit of work, always requires us, after something's happened, to then review, learn, and change and evolve. Okay, so that we just don't because things will happen all the time. This system will continually evolve and improve as we test it and do it in reality, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to sort of,
Just a quick note, councillors. So we do intend to ensure this is a live document, but officially it'll be a 12-month review as per normal procedures anyway. So to ensure that we actually are up to date, particularly around process flows and procedures that align to this, and any changes to business as well.
Good point. This next slide is really just, so there's a flow chart for the process around crisis management. This is really just the top bit, can't all fit on one slide at all, just to show how those 5 elements apply and when you flow through a crisis. So that top thing's around notifying and escalating. Then you're into the emergency response and situational assessment, if emergency response applies. And then you start dropping into what comes on the next slide, which is the actual executing the appropriate response, whether that's crisis or business continuity, ongoing evaluation, are we through it, and then the organisational learning. So that's one whole flow chart, but just cut in half for the purposes of talking about it here and showing you that there's a flow to the management. Yep.
Yeah, we can take a few questions as we go.
Absolutely.
So one thing I noticed reading through it, there was no connection to governance that I saw.
To governance?
Yeah, so no reporting line or no box that says actually we're giving the mayor or the mayor, deputy mayor or whatever a heads up. Is there a
So
reason?
maybe not diagrammatically on a flow chart, but in the role descriptions, which can I just cheat and see if we get to, I'll just jump forward a bit. So in these role descriptions, crisis management team. So the crisis manager, who is defaults to the CEO, has the responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
This is very clear. And that's one of the things I want you all to understand in this room is you don't have a role in having to got to get there and kind of help out, okay? But you can absolutely expect that information flow coming from the crisis manager. So
Yep.
this is where we're at. So that answer your
Yep.
question, haven't shown it diagrammatically, but it's absolutely.
Yep. Cool.
So just one comment around that, and that's why it's really important. And there's this dialogue at the moment around the Emergency Management Act and the changes and the responsibilities of the chief executive and how their role then becomes, is it a controller role? And the pushback that we've given is that the role of the CE is critical, that line of communication remains open between the organisation, what's happening at the BAU level and the governance board. The controller function during an emergency management response is really a specialist role around responding to the emergency, the civil defence situation. So, but yeah, that role is really critical. So yeah.
Cool. Does that answer that question?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So then jumping into, just pulled out some parts of the plan because I think it's helpful to understand. We've essentially got two key teams that get activated or that may be activated under this system. And so the first is a crisis management team structure, okay? Suggested with those roles in that structure. And I think the key point to note here is you can't tie this team up with a whole lot of doing. This needs to be, because these are highly dynamic, intensive, demanding situations. This needs to be kind of clear here. And this is about receiving information, making decisions, and issuing directions, if that makes sense. Okay. And I think that's kind of what you were saying, the assignment before. So yes, there is a key liaison role to everyone around this table from that top role, crisis manager. Yep. Then beneath this, that's the heavy lifting arm. I guess these are the resources that the crisis management team has at their disposal to then go and start managing the crisis. Okay, so they are broken down into those key roles there. Again, this is some of the work we need to do as council now, is just test the roles that fill these. So again, we don't want to be floundering when something happens, right? Who's doing them again? These need to be assigned to the role, understood, and we need to road test them. Okay. So that's the intention there, including with alternates and, so leave arrangements. So all this stuff is, I'm on leave for a month. I was the emergency response coordinator. You're acting in my role or covering this aspect of my role. Okay. Yep.
Just the challenges, councillors, in regards to, obviously, we all have a role to play within the civil defence arena as well, council staff. So balancing emergency management plus BAU crisis management can be very, very challenging, particularly in the infrastructure team that pretty well get allocated across to civil defence for a certain period. So we need to balance that, make sure we have resources to get BAU back up and running as well.
Yep.
This is really echoing Scott. This is really echoing Sims, really, isn't it?
It's similarities. It's not that is most similar to Sims of everything in the document. Correct. Yep. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Sims sort of assigns other specific roles, if you know what I mean, that aren't there, but this is mapped to the organisation, so it works for council. Yep. Cool.
Just we're talking before, and I understand why, in terms of West Reef and the like, they have their own emergency management. But then Simon just picked it up. Then, if there is, in terms of infrastructure, and therefore we then have to start issuing purchase orders and requests to the likes of West Reef, for example. So I understand about them having their own emergency management plan or crisis management plan, but the two of them at some stage would need to meld together or not, because of the urgency, if you like, attached to IS.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to the roles, though, is quite critical. They can instruct or provide, activity towards another party as a third party, i.e. West Reef, to do work. And that's that would be the same for an emergency management fire civil defence anyway. So it still has to go through a structured process where POs are raised. Under emergency, obviously there's requirement to do things quickly, and there will be an executive decision that goes up to make sure that that PO is approved without delaying recovery, if you know what I mean. But it has to be structured still through a role.
Okay, so moving on, these are those key roles defined for both the crisis management team and the crisis response team. Aimed a lot over these because this is really important. You know, we need very clear definition around where those boundaries are and who does what. So anyway, so that's all kind of locked down and defined to help people understand when they're filling those roles, their core responsibilities. Inside the crisis management plan, there is interesting. Sorry, good spotting. Harry, well, how are you spotting that out of interest? Right, okay. Thank you. My wife would actually like one of those where I just turn off. So I might, yeah, thank you. I'll get that later for her. So we're talking about emergency response plan that sits inside the crisis management plan, and we will go down a rabbit hole if we try and predict and describe every single scenario. So what we've tried to do in this plan is wrap. Makes sense. And so we have identified fire-specific plans that are there. So again, we don't have to sort of scramble and make it up on the spot, that relate to evacuation, relate to shelter in place. So essentially, you know, some sort of threat outside of the building that we're currently occupying, a lockdown plan, where there's a threat that might come into that building, medical emergency plan, and a fire plan, okay? And they relate to all of council's premises throughout the district. So we're talking about, you know, Reefton, libraries, etc. And people need to be assigned as to specific roles as in terms of team leader and floor wardens on those facilities. So that's a work in progress. We've got to. Yep.
Can I just ask, does this cascade to sites when we go out, when organises an event, say, like if there's a I don't know, a ratepayer meeting in Karamea Hall? Do we have does this plan speak to how that would be managed if someone walks in and, you know, threatens everyone or whatever?
We can't go down to that detail. It's almost like a special task force that will have to be following. Following and being prepared for each meeting.
So I guess okay, another way to put the question is there that lens put over those events when we do that? Is someone working on a plan to consider exits and panic plans and that sort of stuff?
I think what we would do in those, I mean, when we do have public meetings, we do assess health and safety which I think is what you're referring to. This is probably a broader, higher level piece of work around business continuity in a response to a shock of some kind, whether it's a weather event. But the point's well made around, do we think about each public forum, are they held in an appropriate way, or do we need to think about a security or anything like that? So yeah, health and safety will be assessed as part of a public meeting.
With council staff being so busy, how are you going to structure the training around all this? Because you're going to have to train people in this. I know, you know, it's been full on at the EOC with the training for the civil defence. A long time, like years, people have been trained up to do that sort of stuff. How long are you foreseeing it's going to take to implement this in operations properly?
Just following on from this work, so we've got to this point.
Yeah.
There's stage 2, which covers obviously the gaps that we've found within the business that need to be addressed, plus also how do we roll this out to our staff? So that hasn't been developed yet. Point we've just got to this next stage, we'll look at how we deploy this and how do we keep it live. So that's a piece of work still to be done.
It's a good point though, Tony. It's never done, by the way. The system requires us to keep revisiting and keep testing and upskilling and refamiliarising. So one of the subsequent slides will show that we don't think that magically happens overnight anyway in terms of rolling it out in training. That's kind of set on the 0 to 6 to 12-month horizon around really getting this embedded in council. Yeah, so it's not an easy or fast bit of work. Yeah.
Also too, with the amount of staff turnover, I know that it's improving, you know, you're retaining your staff in BDC, but this is the problem, you know, you're putting all this extra effort and training and energy, and if that member, that key person leaves, then you've got a gap, haven't you? So, you know, it won't be an easy task, will it?
No, but just to that, because it's material, this system requires and suggests that all of this goes into staff induction material. So by rights, you're meeting and setting staff up for success anyway. So this gets put onto that radar from the get-go. So it's not like you're kind of chasing your tail all the time. So that's, you know, one good thing about a systematic approach. Yep. Yep.
Just one further comment. In a nice environment, it would be nice to have one or two staff per department that are, I suppose, the subject matter experts, so they can deploy within departments. So we could set up a working group within council staff to see this like every quarterly to make sure everyone's up to date and trained around it. But that's still to be worked through at the moment.
Okay. The second pillar of the business continuity management system is an IT disaster recovery plan. Why a standalone plan? Pretty much all of council's key processes, services, outputs rely on some IT application software platform. Okay, and so what we diagnosed early on is we need to get that sorted because it basically underpins everything. Its whole backup reinstatement processes for data, etc. So remote storage sites, hourly snapshots, nightly backup, 6 different server locations. And so things are actually in really good shape from that perspective for council, which is fantastic. Yep.
From what I've been reading, you're very reliant on Starlink. Through this, aren't you? So you're saying that your analog is tight. Is that what you're saying? You got a whole lot of stuff that you don't need.
What it's saying is, sorry, do you want me to, what it's saying, you're right, you've picked up on some Starlink dependencies in terms of business continuity, because Starlink will give us the ability to keep going in the event of major loss of existing utilities, i.e. our land-based connectivity, whether it's Chorus fibre cables, our wireless arrangements off Rochford, etc., if they fall over. But there's some very clear work-ons if that hasn't come out in terms of further testing of the Starlink bandwidth and capacity to run all of the processes and if necessary, some prioritisation and the placement of those. There's even flushed out some issues around we've got the unit but not activated. So, so some great things underway there. And that would definitely, and then how do you power them? Okay, so then there's work that's been identified around the generator aspect of powering Starlink units to make sure that we're ready to go. Yep. Yeah,
and then there's that 4-monthly update of the Starlink machine. There's a whole maintenance schedule around all of that hardware.
Firmware updates, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Well picked up.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Phil, with the because everything in Buller, and it's carrying me right through Winakaiki, goes out on 4 fibres out of Westport. And if that fibre gets, I think we need to probably have a wee chat to Chorus and see when they're looking at making it a bit more resilient.
Yep.
Like through the gorge to Anangahua. So that gives you two options. Every single aspect, your cell phones, your FPOS, your 0800 numbers, every single thing goes out over 4 fibres. That goes down, we're in shit street.
It gets worse when it comes to power too.
Yeah.
For Western, yep.
Just to comment on that, obviously, the civil defence team have a lifelines role within that. Paul Gurney, yeah, his role is obviously talking to those major suppliers. So, obviously, it doesn't affect us how we run business, but affects a whole of the community. So it's definitely led by the civil defence team under a lifelines umbrella.
Anyway, just to pick up on that last point, to your point, Tony, there's some continued work needed around things like Starlink generators, but also remote working from home capacities, and the alternate office locations, so that we've got a game plan for anything that happens. Yep, that's fine, we're moving there, we're doing this. Yep, rather than having to solve problems.
Sorry, I'm just talking about, I'm a bit of a stickler for, I know, like this analog hard copy of stuff, because we can't always rely. You think that the Starlink's going to work and then it's going to read, we've got also too, with our cell phones now, we've also got texting through Starlink. That's just if you ever offline, that now works. So I just think, having like I was saying, you have a good analog, like just a grab and go would be, is that in the plan?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it actually says specifically that all of those team roles need a digital copy on their phone that doesn't rely on network connectivity, it's there, and hard copies. Yep. Okay, and so we started with crisis management, we've gone IT, disaster recovery, and then we come to our third pillar being business continuity. Okay, so this is focusing on, disruptions that are beyond crises and beyond emergencies, okay? And really the focus of it here is to just resume business as normal, or at least a minimum standard of business service, if that makes sense. So we did an awful lot of work in this space because it's critical to the planning. So every group sat down and identified all of their key processes, mapped all of the dependencies, people, IT, equipment, facilities, third-party suppliers, so for all of those processes, and then went through a process of looking at the impact of disruption. So across all the stakeholders, goodwill, finance, health and safety, legal, etc., to kind of start understanding the criticality of disruptions on that, and then looked at kind of the tolerable time frame that those services could be out for before we start really hemorrhaging and suffering untenable impact, if that makes sense. Okay, so there's an awful lot of work that sits there now that underpins where this sort of went in terms of understanding the impacts and priorities, if that makes sense. All of those key processes were then mapped into recovery procedures, in terms of what we would do if we had a disruption in one of three areas, being people, IT, or facilities, if that makes sense. So the really amazing thing is, collectively, that mapped up to 56 key processes. We're not getting down to real rats and mice, but really important processes that council, and I think that's a neat thing for you all to understand too, which is the sheer breadth of the things that council's needing to do to deliver services and or services internally that enable some of those external services to work. And it's just a huge level of sort of interdependency, if that makes sense. So all of those are now mapped and described now, including recovery procedures. And that was an incredibly powerful process to work through when you look at the teams who are having those conversations and identifying those issues, including some risks and gaps that now flow through to, okay, we need to plug that one for that to work. A number of initial actions fell out of the work we did that absolutely need addressing for this to work. They've been mapped on essentially a time frame horizon scale based on kind of the significance of them. And the size of those bubbles is really relative to kind of the estimated effort to resolve those, whether that's time, money, I think there's another dimension I can't remember, okay? And then colour-coded for sort of priorities, and that mapped all back to the risks that I was talking about. So they go to for some really near-term, pretty easy things to do, which is like confirm and assign all those key crisis management plan, emergency response plan, business continuity plan, roles and ownership. Okay, pretty easy to do. All the way down to some pretty big things around. So one of the things the process threw up was our utter reliance on hard copy records, for which only one exists, and when they're gone, and we cannot actually do a number of things we need to do without those. Okay, so that's flagged up as a risk. That'll be the subject for a whole nother conversation another day. I'm sure Simon will bring that forward, Simon P. But that's one in which you can't work around. Once they're gone, they're gone. Okay, so that's the end of the spectrum, with everything else in between there, you know. And Simon said it before, reviewing this whole secondment of council staff to civil defence and emergency management, because that's fine when it's just a, you know, statewide district emergency that we can handle. But if we've got a situation that's also an all hands on deck situation with council and them, we've got a bit of an issue there. So there's all those things that fallen out of the way.
So I guess that risk management's a really key concern of mine. How we capture it, how we're discussing it, because I want to understand like a bit more about the records. What happens if we lose those records? How it's a fine, there's nothing. What's the program? You know, that could be obviously quite expensive. You've got to go out and resurvey or whatever else. So understanding of that. So I guess we've got to link this in with our risk management, and maybe the next time we review it, we need to take some of the staff and discuss it. On the plus side, because we've gone through this, there must be some of that we can reduce our risk because we've done mitigation against it. So I think,
Would you like me to answer that, John?
yeah.
So there are things that will directly fall into the risk register. I've already included the paper documentation files into the risk register, which will come to RAC, I think, in September, in terms of risk register update. The good thing to know is all our paper property files are actually in a purpose-designed archive facility in Christchurch. So they are safe as they can be in the controlled environment. The issue is the risk is if they somehow get compromised, like Phil stated, they're lost forever. Ideally, they will all be digitised, and we will put budget potentially into the annual plan to actually start that process. It will take some time, and it's not a cheap exercise either. But that's the ultimate, is to get it all sitting in a cloud base so that we can draw it down anytime. As we call on property files, they get digitised anyway. So there's a slow turnover of digitising some property files, but there are not only property files, but some maps and stuff and historic documents that are kept in random places around the place that need to be sorted out as well, and that's archiving properly as well.
So I guess that sort of follows on from that is, and maybe this is for the end of the workshop, is just that, has this body of work identified any work streams that need to be accelerated, or do we need to add assets or add a budget? Like I noticed the number of Starlinks and things like that. So I guess at the end, if you could explain what any additional budget or assets we need to require, or what work streams we need to concentrate on.
Yeah. Just following through, like I said, on stage 2, which is how do we go about addressing these shortcomings with council? That will come through an annual plan process. If there's something that's a burning platform we need to do straight away, we'll obviously go through the CE and highlight that to council. But I think most of this can be part of an annual planning budget approach. You know, and some of us are system orientated. Generators are pretty well just making sure it's serviced and run up properly, and links with Starlink. And the Starlink list needs to be owned by a certain member of council staff that actually takes responsibility for making sure it's operable. And it's all about getting those systemised things done first. Phil?
So along them lines too, we've heard before that if there was ever an issue with Rome House and you couldn't go back into it, how much of that systems and that would not be retrievable?
Are you talking about if it broke down completely, couldn't go back in and use anything? it really comes down to that medium term, working from home or another way of working. So we're going to make sure that we have the ability to work in another location effectively. In terms of server backups, etc., that's already covered. But it's making sure that we can actually access that. And if there's any servers that are damaged, there should be redundancy backup. So we'll review that as part of the review process as well.
Two questions. So just a bit of a broader brush, Buller Holdings. So have they got similar intentions with like say West Reef? Are they going to have their own plan of attack as far as business continuity goes?
Out of scope at the moment, but I'm happy to share this with Buller Holdings if they would like to use this as a template. Work with the chair there.
That would be great because it sort of saves time, doesn't it? It saves to reinventing the wheel. Also, too, you know, getting back to what Phil was saying as far as remote workings, you probably need more hardware for that, wouldn't you, too? I mean, how they're going to keep their laptops working and all that sort of stuff.
Do you like me to speak to? I know this because I've spent a lot of time with Ungit, who was here just before. Everyone's actually on laptops now, so there isn't more hardware needed. What is needed is a greater rollout of the platforms and the VPNs, and then people's awareness and ability to use them. Because some people have got the hardware capability, but not actually set up to use it. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I don't think. No. I'm thinking maybe from a catastrophic point of view, right? Say, if it is a earthquake or something like that, and we have to remotely work from home, how they're going to power their laptops?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, how has that been taken into consideration if you're going to be doing it mobile workings?
Yeah. The way that works is basically identifying the priority work stream. So, because it's impossible to recover everything and start everything up 100%, because not everyone's got their own under that scenario. Power loss, so transmission lines fall over on the plateau. Buller's got no power, won't have for months. Not everyone's got that ability at home. So it comes down to, so what were the alternate working locations by council? Because we can power and provide comms there. But then the next question will be, what's access like to that? So Tony, that just becomes an iterative process. At least we know our key priorities, and at least we know where we can viably operate from. So how do we get those key people to that place? And then we just keep going. That's kind of how it unfolds. Yep. Okay. I think that's what I was going to kind of say there. It's just really building a picture of some initial steps forward. And then really just as a summary and an overview, what we did before we started the thing was scored and mapped our, let's call it maturity from a business continuity management perspective against that international standard. So, you know, across the things that would say we need, how are we going? There's a snapshot of that in the top there in terms of our overall maturity. The point I'd note, so I think any of us would look at that and say, gee, 11%'s a low score. That's a formal system. And what is apparent through all of those workshops with the groups and staff is how utterly resourceful, capable, adaptable everyone is, because basically the ability to cope belies a system measurement like that. You know, like people just somehow have the ability to get through and make it up, which is great. It's not an entirely relaxed and stress-free way to exist, and that's the power of a systems approach. So what we then went and did all the work, developed the plans, and we've remeasured. And so I want to show you that there's value in a process, because that says that we've jumped up to a 60% maturity. And some of you might be thinking, oh, 60% still not high. It's impossible to be any higher at this stage, because so much of that scoring marks rely on the testing and the annual reviews. We're not there yet. We've only just started and rolled it out. Yep. And so I think that was really powerful and useful, though, to show that we have substantially progressed our maturity in this area. The rubber will hit the road when we actually use it in anger. So, you know, if we do nothing more and we sit it in the top drawer, this will be pretty hard and foreign to come to grips with quickly and add value. So that's our great next work on. Yep. And that's, sorry, and that's,
So in practice, the exercising side of it, so is someone sort of going to have responsibility for this document as a whole to sort of kind of coordinate mini exercises and stuff that, yeah. You know, you wouldn't want to do the whole thing because it would be quite disruptive to the.
In terms of ownership, that's under my role. But in terms of exercising, like I said, stage 2 is how do we go about distributing it, practicing this, refining it going forward. So there's a bit of work to do just to develop that further. Ideally, like I said earlier on, there's some special champions within each department that will actually take a lead within each department, and we gather on a frequency basis to actually review it. Doing an event, it would be very, very helpful, whether it's annually or biannually, and challenging ourselves in terms of how we actually operate under this environment. A lot of this relies on the tier 3s as well, understanding this quite in depth. So the first challenge will be getting it down to that layer so they can actually know how to recover. Like Phil said, the IT team have already got some strong recovery mechanisms in place. I'm being quite pleased with the maturity and how that's come together as well. We are also working on an IT strategy, which is another piece of work that I'm looking after as well, to look at how we, over the whole council, look at optimising our performance in that space as well. But definitely under the disaster recovery, we're in a good space.
So once this has been through RAP today, it will be rolled out to the organisation through a program of comms and engagement. So we've set up a new leadership forum, which will be discussing this piece of work. And we've got an upcoming all-staff meeting in September. So this will be something that the whole organisation gets to hear about and understand that this is part of what we're doing going forward. I mean, just credit to Phil, because I think this has been a great piece of work led by Simon, but Phil's done the work with the individual teams. And that 56, those key processes, teasing those out from the teams has been a really useful exercise for the teams, I think, to actually sit down and take the time to think about this stuff. And this is the best piece of BCP planning I've seen in the 22 years I've worked in local government. So it's a great piece of work. Should be proud of it.
Mr. Mayor, just very quickly, Phil, just the 2 bars that are bringing down to 60%. One of them, of course, is the testing, and the other one is the crisis management. So what have you got planned to start bringing those up, please?
Yep. One of them is the stage 2 Simon has referred to, which is assigning roles and then actually simulations. Yep. And then the rest of it gets picked up when you can prove and show that you've done annual reviews and annual tests, stuff like that. So you cannot actually go and get those points until we're at least a year old, if that makes sense. Yep. So that's the plan. Yep. 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 Thanks.
Just under that loss of power sort of thing, it'd be nice to have like a database of people who've got alternative power, like myself, like run a whole house and stuff. So, you know, council office at corner of Henry.
So through the work that Janice has done as part of that emergency response planning, that sort of information about the infrastructure you might need around generators, for example, fuel stores, all of that's captured elsewhere, which obviously aligns with this. But yeah, there's a big piece of work that Janice Lennon's done around that.
To go further into that, a lot of the community plans to capture that as well, assets. So it goes to Westport and then goes out to your community groups that hold those assets in our plans.
When we sat down as a SLT, the next thing we did was actually then brought up the actual plan, whole collated thing, which I think you've all seen, and just sort of familiarised ourselves. Wasn't proposing to do that today, but it comes together as one big document intensively kind of hyperlinked between itself, so you can quickly click on a link and navigate from one to the other, but wasn't proposing to do that. I was hoping this would just sort of give an overview in a sense that we have arrived at a position of at least, significantly improving where we've got to, and now we need to take it forward and start, operationalising and embedding. Yeah, it is. Correct. But just to follow on from Simon's point before, I guess one of my observations is things like these can be seen as just another demand on top of my already busy day to day, but the level of engagement from everyone has actually been an enjoyable and rewarding process, and Simon's team's given great support to kind of coordinating, getting everyone together. We've done an awful lot of work in a very short space of time, and so I just would give credit to everyone that's poured their guts into getting the actual detail done. There's a lot happened in a very short space of time. Yep. Yeah.
Just an observation from me, when we obviously went through the 56 different processes council actually administers on behalf of the community, a lot of the community won't even know what we do as council half the time. And obviously, this is a public document going after the council meeting today, and it just shows all the various flow paths that we have to do as part of council business on a day-to-day basis.
Cover things like collection of rates, because obviously you need money to, you need money to keep going.
That actually came out as one of the most critical processes. Yep.
Booking a cemetery plot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Follow on from that collection of rates, of course, it's the old story, you're relying upon the banking system for that to be able to be collected. So sure, people come in and pay, but they do it online. But most of the time, as we talked about before about Westbury, for example, the banking system, and there's probably others that I can't think of it as I speak, but we're relying upon third parties a lot. But for me, it's about making sure that we here understand, which is what we've done here. We've gone from 11% up to 60%, and it's just going to be before we get that. It'll never be 100%. No one's ever 100% unless you're a PhD person. But we get to it, just gradually move it up. So, but it's always, for me, it's about BDC and Brown Street. How you're going to manage the post-disaster. So I'm happy. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good line in the sand in terms of a starting point to kick from 11 to 60 is a paradigm shift. But going from here, we want to see continued momentum going up, and that'll be annually. Yeah. Thank you, councillors. If there's any further questions, you can always send me anything or talk to me directly if there's anything else. Like I said, we'll make this an annual review on behalf of the council and bring it forward to RAC meetings. There will be a deep dive into those the gaps that we need to fill and how we're going to address them. Like I said, some of those will come back as part of annual plan discussion, so it's actually follows through on a structured process, and a budget is allocated if we need budget.